heroic feats of engineering in maritime history.
They were their eyes, they were the front line of defence.
Built to save the lives of thousands at sea.
The sea is always a very real and present danger.
Drowned in epic storms.
You had no chance of getting off.
So how did they build them?
Oh, that is majestic.
And how do they stay standing?
What a beauty.
I'm Rob Bell.
I bet that gets really hot.
And I'm going behind closed doors.
Wow!
To explore a hidden world of spine-chilling tales.
The body of his colleague was starting to decompose.
Sunken treasure.
That's one of the muskets that we found down there on the wreck.
No way! Look at that.
And dazzling innovations.
Literally playing with fire.
To uncover the secrets.
There is a pure magic about a light in the dark.
Of some of the most extraordinary structures this country ever built. This time, in a deadly ocean, there's a rock, the biggest ship killer of them all.
If you hit that rock with a ship, that is basically the end of it.
As impossible to build on.
It was a hard rock to conquer.
As it was to avoid.
The entire coastline is strewn with shipwrecks.
This is the story of the men who lived there.
The one lighthouse that everybody dreaded going to, that was the lighthouse I got.
To keep the light burning, whatever the cost.
Keep us swinging against the sides of the rock, being dunked into the freezing Atlantic.
Occasionally, just occasionally, you're dragged through the water.
The Rock Lighthouse. This is Penzance, an historic port in Cornwall and its most westerly major town.
Here we are.
Morning, Rob. Welcome
Morning.
aboard the Vanessa Jane.
How are we looking?
Good. Hopefully no seasickness.
Well, fingers crossed.
I'm leaving dry land behind me and heading out to the southernmost tip of Britain.
The name Land's End says it all, really. In the direction I'm travelling, there's precious little but water, stretching from here pretty much all the way to North America. And these waters have been plied by seafarers for thousands of years. And the rich Cornish maritime history has become synonymous with those who live and work on the edge.
With its sheer granite cliffs and vicious underwater reefs, this is one of the deadliest coastlines in the entire country, where the full force of the North Atlantic is unleashed.
The entire coastline is strewn with shipwrecks. I mean, just hundreds and hundreds. The whole coastline is black with them.
One rock in particular has proved fatal for seafarers and their cargo for centuries. It juts from the seabed 60 metres below and is barely visible at high tide. Wolf Rock.
The Wolf Rock always seems to be grasped by water. There's nothing really between it and America. And so it experiences these very violent, very dramatic Atlantic storms.
You've got 3,000 miles of sea building up, and then you've got the Wolf.
If you hit that rock with a ship, that is basically the end of it.
No one knows how many mariners have met their deaths here. So a lighthouse was essential to warn ships away, strong enough to withstand the battering from the Atlantic. And they built it right on top of the rock.
Oh, that is majestic. You're getting all the waves crashing in here, and occasionally you do get a bit of a peek of the rock itself, but not that often. You can see how well hidden it is. What a beauty. that iconic profile with its smooth edges to deflect the water away as the waves come crashing in, just like that. Magic. The dark coloration of the stone about halfway up gives you a good indication that those stones are always wet as the water keeps crashing in constantly. These waves, this swell, and the winds as well are coming straight in off the Atlantic. They're unforgiving.
And there's an enduring legend about the sound the wind made as it pushed through fissures in this rock.
Any sailors within earshot had an unnerving description of these sounds. It's like a wolf howling, hence the name, Wolf Rock, which is also very fitting considering that this is where England bears its teeth into the Atlantic.
Wolf Rock Lighthouse reaches 41 metres and is one of the tallest in England. It's one of 3 that were built around here more than 150 years ago, and it quickly became the most notorious.
The one lighthouse that everybody dreaded going to was the Wolf Rock, and that was the lighthouse I got. It was stuck out in the worst of the weather if it came in from the southwest. The seas were exceptional down there. It wasn't uncommon for seas to go over the top of the Wolf.
Hello, satellite. Wolf replying. Rough sea with heavy ground swell.
And once you were on the Wolf, you didn't know when you were going to get off.
I once left home December the 27th and didn't get back till March the 26th. You can imagine how difficult it was when the Atlantic swell coming across from America, you had no chance of getting off.
That consequent sense of incarceration was particularly marked at the Wolf. Over the years, the sort of bad reputation it had among keepers as a station that it was difficult to get away from, to escape from, has given it this atmosphere.
But for the ships that rely on it, Wolf Rock is a lifeline.
The Wolf is going to be your first sight of Britain.
There's shipping coming past all the time. So it's either going to go north as it comes off the Atlantic, or it's going to go south, heading up the English Channel. Shipping's coming all directions.
Wolf Rock is both a hazard and an important landmark. And it's astonishing that they were even able to build on it, given its exposed position so far from land.
So how did those early engineers even dare to stake a claim to Wolf Rock, 8 miles out into the North Atlantic?
This is Wolf Rock. For hundreds of years, unsuspecting mariners had crashed into it. But engineers would struggle to mark it as a hazard.
It was so rare for the seas to be calm enough to even get on the rock. In 1790, a Cornish mine engineer considered the feasibility of getting rid of the thing altogether by blowing it up.
A year later, another man, Lieutenant Henry Smith, was granted a license to build a navigational mark on the rock.
He was a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, and he cruised this area in 1781, 1782, and seems to have developed a passion for marking the hazards in this area.
Smith's daring engineers leapt off the boat and managed to hack out enough of a hole in the rock to erect a 20-foot-high iron mast. But it was the marker's finishing touch that was the pièce de résistance of this assault on the rock. It was topped off with a wolf's head cast in bronze. And apparently that head was made hollow so that the fierce Atlantic winds would make it howl. But within weeks, this first attempt to claim Wolf Rock was unceremoniously dispatched by the sea. So somewhere down there, there's a bronze wolf's head.
Subsequently, there were other attempts to mark the Wolf, each one ending in failure. None of them were strong enough to withstand the winter gales that the area experiences every year.
As a result, ships continued to founder on the rock, culminating in 3 catastrophic wrecks in quick succession.
A country that proposed itself as a global maritime power could not really afford to have unmarked hazards like the Wolf Rock lying around in its seas, and Trinity House realised that there was no choice but to mark it.
Trinity House is the authority that runs all the lighthouses in England and Wales. And in 1861, it commissioned engineers William Douglas and James Walker to take on Wolf Rock.
The construction of Wolf Rock Lighthouse seemed to become an agonisingly long war of attrition with Mother Nature. So the vicious seas and difficult access here meant that the work timetable wasn't so much reckoned in days per year, more like minutes. Sometimes conditions were so bad that the workers only managed to rack up 83 hours of work in the year.
Take a grueling 3 years just to dig the foundations.
A measure of how difficult the Wolf Rock was to build. 6 years hacking away at that rock, slowly, effortfully raising each piece of stonework, can be seen when you look at some of the other building sites. Despite all of the technological advances by the time the Wolf was being built, it was still a hard rock to conquer.
The blocks were jigsawed or dovetailed in such a way that they connected horizontally as well as vertically. So they were all interlocked, all totally bound into each other.
They had to make sure it would withstand the relentless hammering of the Atlantic. 9 years after its architects first set foot on the rock, the Wolf's light shone for the very first time on the 1st of January, 1870. With the lighthouse fully functioning, it soon became clear that there was another problem: getting the men on and off the rock.
How you going, Andy?
How we doing, Rob?
Am I right to come up?
Absolutely.
Here on the Firth of Forth, Andy and his crew are going to help me work out how they did it, using nothing more than a length of rope and a winch.
Getting onto the lighthouse was often done using something called a bosun's chair, which sounds quite grand, quite comfortable, a bosun's chair. But it actually just involves a piece of rope and some competent knot tying.
I'm using a knot called a bowline on the bight.
And if I pull this tight, I have a knot here now that will not slip, no matter how hard I pull on that. I've got 2 loops around me. One goes just under my bum, and the other goes around the waist. Andy, can I borrow your expertise on my knot tying here? Are you happy I've tied a correct bowline on the bight there?
Certainly looks like a beautiful wee bowline there.
Now for the real test.
Andy, can we get a hoist up, please?
You can
Andy.
indeed.
Taking my weight, and my feet are off. Oh yeah, and I'm away. I'm pretty pleased with that.
And you can see why it's called a bosun's chair.
I can really sit back in this.
That's the Queensferry crossing over there.
I've got a better view up here. Look where I am. It's not the most comfy of methods of transportation I've ever had, but it does a job. I mean, bosun's chair is maybe a bit misleading, but you know, I certainly feel very secure in it. Just with a clever bit of rope tying and a knot there.
But unlike the lighthouse keepers on the Wolf, I don't have the swirling Atlantic beneath me.
The Trinity House boat, THV Stella, used to take you out. The launch was dropped into the sea, and then a crane was rigged on the landing by the keepers, and you would get into kind of a bosun's chair type of thing, and they would then haul you up and swing you around so you were put on the lighthouse.
Very, very few of us have such an arduous journey to work. Frequently there were near misses, keepers swinging against the sides of the rock, being dunked into the freezing Atlantic.
Occasionally, just occasionally, you're dragged through the water. But if you had a wet relief, as they called it, you could send a message in to the superintendent, permission to open the rum bottle. So that was a good thing.
This extraordinary footage is of a crew change on Wolf Rock more than 70 years ago.
The little boat has only a short time for the most treacherous operation in their dangerous journey, landing the new keepers. To cross this giant moat, where the smallest slip means certain death, the Trinity House men bring a bowline into action. They had 2 months on this forbidding-looking rock. Their only link with land was a radio. Their home was a 200-foot-high tower. Beyond that, there was nothing but the sea. Now it's the turn of 2 others to enjoy the luxuries of Wolf Rock.
Despite the dedication of their keepers, Wolf Rock and the other lighthouses in the area couldn't completely stop ships from sinking.
There's an estimated 6,000 ships lying at the bottom of the sea around the coastline here, thanks to its formidable array of gnarled cliffs, secret coves and submerged rocks. Out here, I'm floating above a ship's graveyard.
Wreck hunter Ben Dunstan has been diving these waters for the past 22 years. In the last year alone, he's found 12 new wrecks, and there are plenty still to be discovered.
Do you have a system when you head out looking for wrecks? Do you go to specific sites where you think one might be, or is it kind of we'll just swim around and see what we find?
We've got 2 approaches to finding shipwrecks. You either research your wreck, know where your wreck is, and you dive that spot, or our favourite one is to just look at the coast and think to yourself, where would a ship end up sinking? If you pick either of them, you usually find shipwreck remains.
One wreck that lies submerged beneath these waters is the Boyne. She'd already made the epic journey from Indonesia with 900 tons of sugar when she spotted the lights on Wolf Rock. The Boyne was almost home when the fog came in, enveloping the entire coastline. Her crew thought she'd cleared Lizard Point and was on her way to Falmouth, but she hadn't gone far enough. On the 1st of March 1873, the Boyne crashed into the cliffs at Mounts Bay, killing all but 4 of her 19 crew. The exact fate of the Boyne has been a mystery for almost 150 years. Now, Ben thinks he's found her, and her treasure trove.
What have we got here?
So the most impressive find, which is this, which is actually the ship's chronometer. That would have been carried on board to tell longitude while at sea.
That's amazing. It's got numbers on here, so we've got...
you can see there, 3870, which is also stamped on the outside here. The makers were only active for a few years, and they were active when the Boyne was made.
Can we see what else you've got in here?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first items that we found on the site was that sticking out of the ground.
Is that a telescope?
Yeah, it is. It's a telescope. When I first saw it, I completely didn't realise what it was. It wasn't until I broke the end out. That's actually the end cap. And there's the...
No way!
Yeah, there's the end lens.
Can I have a look? Can I hold it?
Of course, yeah. It's made of brass. It's quite strong.
I was not expecting to see that glass still in there.
You think of what that's been through and how far that's gone, it's still intact.
Wow!
One clue that made Ben think he'd found the Boyne was the chronometer. Another was these knives and forks.
And if you actually look on the handles, they got T on them.
Yep.
Now, W. Tyndall was the owner of the shipping line. So that confirms basically this is definitely the wreck of the Boyne.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Look at this. Look at how ornate this is, the decoration on there.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Goodness me. So when you're discovering this on the seabed, have they been quite far dispersed from the wreckage of where you can see the hull or the hulk of the ship is?
It's actually where the ship has broken down. All these pieces which have survived by slotting into the narrow slots in the rock. So all the fabric of the ship has completely gone to bits, and it's just these small items which have managed to slide down and be preserved.
Now, there's something else you've been carrying around with you.
I'll give you a clue as to what that is.
Well, yeah, okay. Okay. These look like musket balls to me. Oh, here we go. I mean, wow.
So yeah, that's one of the muskets that we found down there on the wreck. And that was actually lying right down in the bottom of the gully, right in the base like that.
Kind of what, like, almost wedged in?
Yeah, wedged in. Unfortunately, the front piece here is gone. And if you look, it's only actually the timber and the brass pieces which are remaining. The iron barrel and the side lock mechanism, which would have been here.
Yes.
That's completely eroded away and gone.
But you have to remember, it's been down there for 150 years, we're saying.
Yeah, yeah. It's remarkable, really, that the wood has survived as good as it has.
I'm astonished it has.
Yeah.
This is superb, Ben. I guess it's finds like this that makes you want to keep going back in to see what else is out there.
It's just incredible that things like this have survived. When you've got things like this in your hand.
It brings it to life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Although the coastline is littered with wrecks and their buried treasure, Wolf Rock Lighthouse undeniably saved lives. But what was it like for the keepers who had to live on such an isolated rock? And possibly the most challenging lighthouse ever for the men who had to work on it.
The Wolf was probably the most notorious of all UK lighthouses. In fact, I can remember one occasion when somebody actually left the job as we were approaching. They said, "No, I'm not going on there."
It was the way of life, and there were downsides when the weather was absolutely awful, and a time when you were cooped up, you know, with two others in a chimney basically for 28 days, which was damp and dark. If you didn't get on with the others in the crew, then life would be terrible. You just want to be somewhere else. There was nothing much you could do about it.
Lighthouse keepers, they had one main task, which was to keep the light burning in good condition, in radiant brilliance at all times. So they had to be really technically competent, but they also had to keep the house, the building, in good order, maintained, regularly swept and polished, ventilated.
The tower rocks were the lights that paid the most, and also were the ones that nobody wanted to go to.
Facilities were fairly primitive on the Wolf. You didn't have a shower, you just got washed at the sink. You had a bucket for the toilet, opened the lantern, and you just threw it over the gallery rail. Lighthouse keeping was like a 19th century job in a 20th, 21st century world. We all knew that automation would eventually take over.
When you look back to what we did do and what we put up with, people wouldn't put up with it these days, you know. It was a different era, it's a different way of life, and it's gone now.
But just because lighthouses are all automated, it doesn't mean the keepers have gone for good. They just live on the lighthouse for a much shorter time. I've come to Land's End Airport to meet Ian Gorvin, a technical manager for Trinity House. His job title might have changed, but the task of keeping the light going hasn't.
So where are we heading?
This is our goods in storage area.
All right.
It's basically the lighthouse equivalent of Amazon. Ian's crew spend up to 2 weeks at a time in each lighthouse in the region. And this is where they store everything they'll need for the jobs at hand.
We've got a tabletop oven. That will do most of our cooking on a station.
Where's that heading to?
That's for long ships. So,
right, okay.
We've got battery chargers in Lizard, some bulbs.
Here, Wolf Rock. There we go.
Okay, there's not... Actually, in Wolf at the moment, we got a tin of paint.
That's it at the moment?
Yeah.
Just a tin of paint in Wolf Rock, but some of these boxes are a bit more...
Yeah, there are things like tea towels.
Is that toilet roll at the back there?
Yeah, you can't have enough toilet roll on a station.
Of course. I mean, we're not animals.
Yeah. We have a nice door hinge.
Wow, OK, so now we're getting a bit more industrial here. That's a good chunky hinge, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I've noticed there's quite a lot of big stuff on the shelves up here.
They're water bags. They take 400 litres each, and that's how we refill each lighthouse with water. So we've got big storage tanks on the lighthouses.
For what, cooking, washing, drinking, whilst you've got crews out there?
Yeah, it all comes in these bags.
And all this is being delivered by helicopter?
Yes.
Today, the only way in and out of Wolf Rock is to land a helicopter on top of the lighthouse. And the landing pad is even smaller than the chopper itself.
When you flew out there, you'd see the lighthouse getting bigger and bigger, and then it would just disappear when you were about to land and disappear underneath you. It just seemed so small.
So how did they build a helideck that could withstand the weight of a helicopter without destabilising the lighthouse or obscuring the light?
The design and the concept of the helipads themselves was in of itself an ingenious piece of engineering, which can be seen as a kind of nice successor to the ingenuity of the Victorian designers and builders who raised these towers in the first place.
The final design was based around a series of cross-linked steel frames. 4 poles with flat discs ensure the pilot can judge where he's landing, as he can't see the helipad from the cockpit. Do you get times when you get out and it's just impossible to land and you think, well, no, we can't?
Yeah, the waves do overtop sometimes.
When the waves are crashing over the helipad and the wind is buffeting the helicopter, it can be terrifying.
If you're in that situation, it's either wait for a lull in the waves so you can land with enough time to get down below, or you have to back off and come back.
I'll never forget my own journey to a rock lighthouse. I remembered the helicopter approaching the tower and seeing the helipad there from that elevated position and thinking it just looks like a postage stamp, a grey postage stamp surrounded by surging waves. And it was at that point the pilot decided to turn to us and say, you know, this is the first time I've actually flown to this one. How do I land?
If the crew's only on the lighthouse for around 4 weeks a year, how do they know when something goes wrong? There's a live link to each lighthouse, operated from a central control facility at Harwich. And they use decommissioned equipment like this to train the technicians.
So this is the computer side as such. We can control and receive all the feedback from each lighthouse, and it will look at any alarms that are created on station.
I mean, this is an absolute game changer, isn't it? Being able to remotely observe and analyse what's going on. I think the ultimate question for me to ask you, Ian, a modern day lighthouse keeper, is what happens when a bulb goes out?
Well, we always have a backup. So if the main bulb goes, we'll go on to a main 2 bulb. So we have an automatic lamp changer.
And is that a typical mechanism on top?
Yeah.
Can we see what that would look like?
Yes, certainly. So I'll just change over to...
Oh, there we go. Easy as that.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, would you get notification of that remotely through a system like this?
It would flag up a main 1 fail and then onto main 2. None of us want to see a black station. You know, that's our worst nightmare.
What you see coming through this shed here is there's so many other jobs and elements of lighthouses to keep working.
You've got to be almost a jack of all trades. Yeah, if you're on a lighthouse and your cooker fails, what are you going to do? You've got to be able to fix it. Or if the engine fails, that same person might have to fix the engine. And
for a relatively small shed, there's quite a lot to take out from here.
Technician Lewis Pullen has just come back from 2 weeks' maintenance on Wolf Rock. If anything, a lighthouse keeper's job is more skilled than ever, and almost as dangerous. And it includes everything from cleaning the optic, to releasing trapped seagulls, and changing the heli nets.
That means taking nets out putting a harness on, attaching onto the top of the lighthouse, and then sitting over the side of the lighthouse and undoing these helling nets that are there, one at a time.
It's not an easy job at the best of times, but it's terrifying when you're so exposed.
Really take our time to do it, because obviously it's a super dangerous job. A bit scary when you look down and there's nothing below you apart from a reef and waves and things like that.
As well as Cornwall's rock towers, there's a network of shore-based lighthouses like this one, not far from base, Pendeen, where I'm catching up with Ian again, and he's going to put me to work.
Yes, this is what we want to see. Oh, Ian, that's beautiful. Okay, so we're up here. This is the business end of everything we've been talking about. What maintenance can we do here today?
Well, we could have a look at getting you cleaning the optic.
I'd love to. Where do we start?
Well, start with turning the optic off. There we go.
There's a lot of glass in there.
Yeah.
So what's the Wiki's secret trick to cleaning this 2.5-ton optic?
Have you been in this position before?
Household glass spray and elbow grease. I'm literally inside the lens now.
All right. And how often is a job like this being done?
Here we do it quarterly. In the old days, the keepers were probably in here every day cleaning.
It's like being inside a kaleidoscope.
It is, yeah.
Oh.
This lens may be almost 100 years old, but it's the reason why the light is visible 16 nautical miles away.
One of the biggest dangers I'm finding up here is when you just move about a little bit, it really makes you very dizzy, the way the light just bounces off all of this. You've got to be quite careful. It's really quite trippy.
But it's now dark enough outside that the lights come on inside. And I don't want to get in the way.
All right, well, I'm going to have to call that a day then. So, back down.
Just as we're leaving, I spot something I can't ignore. And have a bit of a moment.
Oh, look at that! Oh. I bet that gets really hot.
We've gone to this size now from that.
So the kind of halogens you've got up there now, they're roughly what?
35 watts.
This is 3,500 watts.
Yep.
Wow! 100 times more powerful a bulb, but not necessarily the amount of light that you get, but the electricity that it takes. That is amazing. That's like the size of my head.
There are more than 60 lighthouses in the UK, warning ships of potential hazards. But with all our technical advances, why does our coastline still sink ships?
Oh God, that's so good. All happening out here. Here's dolphins. Hello, mate. Magical.
For me, there are few places more beautiful and awe-inspiring than Cornwall, or more deadly. And reefs like these are as threatening to ships as they've always been. This is the wreckage of RMS Mülheim. It was heading for a landfill site in Lübeck on the north coast of Germany.
It was coming around Land's End. The chief petty officer stood up, caught his trouser leg in the footplate control lever, fell over, blacked out, and the ship ran straight onto the rocks.
Although our ability to overcome nature is extraordinary, bad luck and human error can get you in the end.
Ships will always get wrecked. There will always be accidents. There will always be incompetence. It's all very well having all these navigational instruments, but you've still got to keep a good physical lookout. And that is just the same today. Systems go down. There have been incidents where a ship has come to grief simply because there wasn't a good physical lookout.
Here at the University of Plymouth, They have an amazing bit of kit that helps to prevent accidents before they happen. A state-of-the-art ship simulator.
Oh, hang on. Oh, it's very realistic, isn't it? This is very clever.
I've come here to learn how to safely navigate a 93,000-ton container ship home from the Atlantic.
Is it a typical bridge?
This is a typical layout. The modern ships now have what we call an electronic display and information system.
Okay.
That's real-time information that's telling us where the vessel is on that chart.
The ship also has radars, another navigation aid to show us what's around us and often what course we're on.
And so fixed objects that the radar would pick up would include what? It would include land?
An example here, we have the Wolf Rock, 2.5 miles away.
I can see it.
And we have land, so we have Land's End there.
So our electronic charts and our radar.
And what they often call the Mark I eyeball. Yes.
The original and best.
The original and the best.
That's using just your eyes to spot something.
And we can see the Wolf Rock, so we could take a visual bearing of that aid to navigation.
Very good. Where are we set to be heading?
Well, we're heading north.
So Land's End will gradually come past us.
Yes, you can see the vague outline of it there. Steering at the moment is being done by autopilot.
Okay. So if I were to put a command into the wheel here to steer towards Land's End.
Would you like to do that?
I would love to do that, yeah.
Okay, so you now have the wheel.
Wow.
I am loving this. It's the closest I'll ever get to steering a ship.
So I'm seeing lots of numbers change.
That's the rudder that you've applied. So
I've applied quite a bit there,
You've applied
have I?
quite a lot of rudder.
We're not going to lose any of these containers off the side, are we?
No.
No, very good. We're definitely going round. Goodness me.
And we can see it on here. And the radar as well.
It's quite an aggressive turn.
I tell you what, I mean, I'm feeling that in my legs.
And we're sailing dangerously close to land.
What we'll get you to do is to get the vessel back on course. Should we put the wheel amidships then?
Yeah, let's do that. So my tilt is coming back off. My ROT, is that what?
Yes.
Okay.
And we wanted to go on 360 or 00.
Okay.
North, okay.
Now, if all this went down for some reason, is there backup?
We have our radar. Vessels are also required to keep a certain number of paper charts as backup.
So I'm trying the exercise again, this time without the help of electronic charts.
So we've got Rock Lighthouse off here.
Yes.
Well, Land's End is ahead of me, so to be north, we need to be heading a lot more in this direction here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bring that round. What really helps me is being able to look out and see visual markers like the lighthouse, like the land.
Lighthouses aren't just a warning. They're also part of the landscape and a vital aid to navigation.
So we are starting to come round. Here we go. Okay, well. God only knows how stressful this would be if I had winds coming across and that visibility that I was taking those aids from was gone through fog or through heavy rain. It's not easy, and you can see how you could quickly get yourself into danger if you didn't know what you're doing.
So we're going to resume our course of due north.
Due north.
000.
Yes. Any help you can get out here could possibly save lives. One of the reasons Wolf Rock is such a hazard to shipping is that it doesn't really seem to belong there. It's surrounded by open water. It sticks straight up from the seabed and it's isolated. It's all on its own. So what's it doing there? And where did it come from?
To understand why rocks like these catch seafarers unawares, we need to go back hundreds of millions of years to how they were formed in the first place.
The greatest influence on the landscape of the geology of Cornwall are two major tectonic events that happened around about 300 million years ago. The first was the collision of two continents colliding together, where huge plumes of molten magma would rise up and intrude into the Earth's crust.
pressure, these plumes would slowly change the surrounding sedimentary rock.
And it takes almost 2 million years to cool down to form the rock that will eventually become granite.
Geologist Robin Shale is an expert on the different rock formations found in this area.
We're sat on top of granite. Granite is present below the whole peninsula, from West Devon through Cornwall, huge volumes of it, maybe 45,000 cubic kilometres of this molten material have been injected close to the Earth's surface. And when it's eroded, it produces these spectacular landforms that you can see around me.
So looking out, Robin, it's about 8 miles out there, I can see Wolf Rock. So is that a continuation of the rocks we're on here now?
No, it's actually completely different. It's a bit of a geological oddity. We form the granites by plate collision, but actually we form Wolf Rock by pulling plates apart. Wolf Rock is a remnant of volcanic activity.
Magma would have welled up and pushed its way through a fissure in the Earth's crust inside this volcano. But suddenly it began to cool down and it solidified in the vent, forming what we know now as Wolf Rock.
Wolf Rock started out as something much bigger than we see today. It would have looked something a bit like this, a very typical cone-like volcanic shape. And over a long period, millions of years, that volcano became dormant. It was no longer erupting.
I'm going to show what impact that had.
So for my little demonstration, I need some Ice Age seawater. Luckily, I prepared earlier. All right, so let's see what happens. All right, here we go. It all starts to erode away. This is the evolution of the Earth sped up. Corrosion, corrosion, ice ages come and go. Oh, well, what have we here? There we go. So, I mean, we'll finish off our years of erosion here by hand. And what we're left is this lump of hard rock that was hidden away in the core of what was my volcanic cone all around it. This is Wolf Rock.
The Wolf was and is still a really important kind of staging post.
There must have been a lot of shipwrecks on it before the light was built.
The sea is rarely ever becalmed at the tower's foot. It's always on the move, it's always rough.
The lighthouse was designed and built to sort of dissipate the energy of the sea. So although it might shake and although water would go up past the windows and that, it wasn't going to be the end of the world.
As long as you were inside the lighthouse, you're okay, you're safe.
The Wolf Rock Lighthouse has been given one of the toughest jobs of any man-made construction, to stand up to the awe-inspiring and ever-present power of the North Atlantic. And it's been doing just that for 150 years. And you know what? It doesn't show any signs of giving up just yet. Thanks to a combination of brilliant engineering, 21st century technology, and dogged determination, the Wolf Rock Lighthouse seems set to always be here, a beacon reaching out to distant horizons.
Heroic feats of engineering in maritime history.
They were their eyes, they were the front line of defence.
Built to save the lives of thousands at sea.
The sea is always a very real and present danger.
Drowned in epic storms.
You had no chance of getting off.
So how did they build them?
Oh, that is majestic.
And how do they stay standing?
What a beauty.
I'm Rob Bell.
I bet that gets really hot.
And I'm going behind closed doors.
Wow!
To explore a hidden world of spine-chilling tales.
The body of his colleague was starting to decompose.
Sunken treasure.
That's one of the muskets that we found down there on the wreck.
No way! Look at that.
And dazzling innovations.
Literally playing with fire.
To uncover the secrets.
There is a pure magic about a light in the dark.
Of some of the most extraordinary structures this country ever built. This time, on a deadly rock far out at sea.
The conditions were unbelievably difficult.
An enigmatic designer risks his life.
This man must have been a genius, because he built the impossible.
To bring hope to one of Britain's most extreme locations.
It's a fairly terrifying thought.
I suddenly feel a bit seasick.
This is a story of the uncanny.
His arm comes out of the coffin, tap, tap, tap.
The unpredictable.
And suddenly, it was a freak wave.
And the inspirational.
It's an amazing piece of engineering.
Here at the Smalls Lighthouse. Our story begins on a dark and stormy night in the middle of the Irish Sea in the winter of 1801. Around 20 miles off the coast of Pembrokeshire, in one of the remotest lighthouses in the world, a fateful event was about to take place that would go down in seafaring history.
Two lighthouse keepers, Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell, were sent out to do their shift at the lighthouse. Unfortunately, these two were not the best of friends.
Legend has it that these two men were renowned for quarrelling in the taverns on shore. They could empty a bar with the force of their arguments. Out on the lighthouse, an almighty storm blew in, and battered by the elements, one of the keepers, Thomas Griffiths, became gravely ill and suddenly died.
The other keeper was then left in a very macabre dilemma.
Howell realised that he could be accused of murder if he were to dispose of the body in the traditional way, out into the sea. So instead, he decided to keep the corpse with him on the lighthouse until relief was sent.
The body of his colleague was starting to decompose. It would be, shall we say, not very healthy to be shut up in a small octagonal cabin with a body.
He decides to use some of the wooden cladding from inside of the living accommodation to make a very simple coffin. He can't keep the coffin inside, so the only option is to strap it outside to the walkway. This works fine for a few days, but as the winds continue with the storm, the coffin actually breaks loose and breaks open.
And the corpse's arm dangles out, knocks against the window pane.
His arm comes out of the coffin and starts to tap, tap, tap the window. The hand seems to be beckoning Howell to join him. He's absolutely distraught.
For a grueling 4 months, terrible storms lashed the lighthouse, making it impossible to recover the surviving keeper. And when the relief boat was finally able to take him back to dry land, this traumatic experience had taken a terrible toll.
Unfortunately, the man was unrecognisable to even his closest friends and family. His hair had turned white and he had gone insane.
But this tragedy precipitated a change that would prevent such horrific circumstances from ever happening again.
It's said that this story led directly to a change in policy on the part of the lighthouse operators, and that thereafter 3 keepers would be stationed on a rock lighthouse at any one time. And that is a very sensible precaution.
Those events took place over 200 years ago. Today, that very same spot is watched over by a wonder of Victorian engineering. The Smalls Lighthouse. The stone tower we see guarding these rocks today was completed in 1861. 41 metres high, with a solid stone base and walls up to 3 metres thick. It's a shining example of what became the gold standard design for rock lighthouses from the late 19th century.
You see it from a distance as having this really gracefully sweeping sides to it that lead up to the light on the top. It's an amazing piece of engineering.
Based on a design first conceived of by legendary lighthouse builder John Smeaton, the Smalls is constructed with over 3,000 tons of granite blocks, capable of withstanding the extraordinary forces of the sea. But in such a remote location, so far offshore, why did they need a lighthouse at all?
Out there is the Irish Sea, and as the name suggests, it's what separates England, Scotland and Wales from Ireland. And for centuries it's been like a super highway for getting around the British Isles.
The Irish Sea is busy with all types of shipping. So you've got shipping crossing to and from Ireland, crisscrossing, coming up and down all the time.
It was once one of the busiest and most unpredictable shipping channels in the world.
But lying in wait within that shipping channel are the lonely rocks where tragedy after tragedy has played out over hundreds of years.
Rocks whose unassuming name belies a terrifying reputation. The Smalls Reef.
The Smalls is basically somewhere to the west of nowhere, very remote, very exposed, right in the middle of this very dangerous shipping lane.
It's characterised by these dangerous rocky reefs. It's a really tricky place to be because it's easy to get trapped into these small islets or drawn into these narrow channels because of very strong tidal currents.
This scattering of rocks is probably named for their less than imposing presence on the horizon, but that in itself is a reason to dread them. Many are hidden just beneath the waves, making them a lethal menace in this busy thoroughfare.
There may be a lighthouse here today. However, back in the 18th century, there was nothing but rocks and the wreckage of broken ships.
But a terrible storm in 1773 was to remove any doubt that someone should try to build a lighthouse on the Smalls Reef.
The Pennsylvania, a 1,000-ton clipper such as these, had left Philadelphia and was almost at her destination port of Bristol when she was caught in a howling gale and enormous waves.
Overpowered by the sea, she was dashed against the largest of these rocks. After over 3,000 miles of sailing, she sank in desperate isolation on the Smalls Reef, only hours away from port.
In the grim aftermath, the remains of the ship and the 75 souls on board slowly washed up on the shores of Pembrokeshire. But this tragedy did convince someone to try and conquer these rocks in the name of humanity.
It was by a native of Cardiganshire in Wales, John Phillips. And he was perhaps the first person to eye the Smalls Reef not with fear, but with a sense of opportunity.
John Phillips was master of one of Liverpool's thriving docks during the shipping boom of the 18th century. He'd noted new lighthouses springing up all around him. and no doubt the money being made by their owners when dues were paid by passing ships arriving in port. Phillips was deeply in debt, so investing in a lighthouse wouldn't have been easy. But the sinking of the Pennsylvania moved him to throw financial caution to the wind and raise the money to do, in his own words,
a great and holy good to save humanity. And he proposed a lighthouse of so singular a construction so as to be known from all others in the world, as well as by day as by night. A fairly lofty ambition, you might say. So now all he needed to do was figure what form this world-renowned lighthouse should take.
The Smalls Lighthouse guards a group of deadly rocks around 20 miles off the coast of Wales. After countless ships and lives were lost to the sea here, a Liverpool dockmaster decided something must be done. But 250 years ago, building on a wave-washed rock this far out at sea was venturing into entirely uncharted territory. So how did they do it?
One of the proposals that came through was actually from a man named Henry Whiteside. He'd never built a lighthouse before.
Little is known about Henry Whiteside, and his name might easily have been forgotten had he not come up with a plan for a lighthouse on the Smalls.
Henry Whiteside was one of those fascinatingly elusive figures in history, and especially in lighthouse history. This man, I can only think, must have been a genius, because he built the impossible on the Smalls Rock.
Whiteside wasn't known for designing buildings at all. He'd made his reputation making violins and harpsichords, which may go some way to explaining the mind-boggling form that was to eventually emerge at a height of 6 stories above the sea. A wooden shed built on giant stilts.
His design consisted of a simple hut standing on timber legs made from the trunks of Welsh oaks that held it suspended 40 feet above the reef below. Nowadays, stilts are a relatively common design solution in all kinds of structures at sea, from big piers to navigational lights and even floating oil rigs. But what's the theory behind using stilts?
In modern engineering, there's a lot of very complicated mathematical modelling and computational fluid dynamics that goes into designing structures at sea. Whiteside's design process may not have gone to this level of complexity, but was still trying to achieve the exact same thing. And whilst all these calculations and equations would have applied, there's a much simpler way to explain his design solution.
It's less scientific, but you'll get my point. A traditional building might have a stone wall to stand up to the elements, represented here by a sheet of plywood.
Right, let's see how long I can last with this solid front to the waves.
This step ladder is my prototype lighthouse, and I want to perch safely on top to keep clear of the waves. But opposing the waves simply gives the water a surface to push against. And quickly reveals the true power of the sea.
Now that very rudimentary demonstration kind of proves my point. The connections and materials on this ladder were not built to withstand those kinds of forces when they're acting on an area that big. Look at it, absolutely massacred the ladder. Okay, so now let's see how my structure fares as I take it out on stage 2. This is effectively now a tower on stilts.
This time, the legs holding me up are slender and offer minimal resistance against the waves. Instead, most of the energy heading towards me passes straight through them, leaving the structure, and me, considerably more stable. So while this may not be the perfect prototype, Whiteside's design proposal clearly had legs. But there was little more to it than a cabin on stilts.
So this is a model based on the original plan for the first Smalls Lighthouse. You can clearly see the 8 pillars at the corners of the octagonal platform. You've got this wonderful rope ladder. It's about 40 feet in height, and I cannot imagine climbing up and down there in the weather that they would have had.
Above the stilts is the cabin accommodation, and above that, the all-important lamp room, with a walkway for exterior access and a limited chance for exercise. There was a winch to hoist up heavy supplies like coal and water, and there was also a flagpole for signalling to passing vessels. But conditions inside would no doubt have been challenging for 2 or 3 men sharing for months at a time.
These panels have been exposed to give you an idea of what life might have been like inside. It would have been very cramped. When the weather was wet and windy, you wouldn't want to be outside. So it wouldn't have been very comfortable, I don't think, for long periods of time.
It wouldn't just have taken bravery to live in the first Smalls Lighthouse, but to build it too.
A lot of the lighthouses around Britain were built in these kind of absolutely horrendous conditions where the workmen were often clinging literally to the rocks. So the conditions were unbelievably difficult, and it must have taken unbelievable courage to kind of stay on.
And nerves of steel were certainly necessary when Whiteside and his men ventured onto the Smalls Reef to excavate the foundations for the lighthouse's wooden legs.
A huge storm blew up whilst the men were working on the reef, making it impossible for the support boat to get back to them without risking being wrecked itself. So the boat returned to the safety of shore without the men, leaving the builders stranded on this barren rock.
In bad weather, there isn't any part of it that isn't completely exposed and completely wave-washed. There is water breaking over it the whole time.
It took 2 days for the storm to subside before the boat could go back to see if any of the men were still left. And to their amazement, they found that all the builders were still there, having only survived by clinging on to the one iron bar they'd managed to secure in the rock before the storm came in.
When they were finally rescued, some of them quite badly injured, but also the wind and the waves had stripped the clothes from their bodies.
Despite this setback, Whiteside pressed on with his pioneering ideas. He planned to bolster the strength of his wooden stilts by combining them with a relatively new building material for the time, cast iron.
Henry Whiteside may have had faith in his choice of materials, but it must have been playing on his mind that putting together a structure like this in such a hostile environment had never been attempted before. So he came up with an ingenious solution for doing a trial run. He built entire sections of his lighthouse in advance so he could practice putting it all together here on land. He basically created a giant piece of flat-pack furniture.
Local people would never have seen anything like this before, and lots of people did come to the local area to see this being built. It must have been quite the attraction.
Just imagine the sight of this thing here in the small fishing harbour of Solva. This weird-looking wooden cabin perched 6 stories up in the air, towering over all the cottages.
Whiteside's ingenious prefabrication here didn't just prove that the violin maker's ideas could work, it no doubt averted disaster.
During the trial run, Whiteside identified and solved a problem with the original supports that could have caused a catastrophic failure out at sea.
Early on, Whiteside had experimented with using cast iron and timber props. But in the end, he realised that timber and iron have different properties. Iron is essentially static and strong until it's broken with enough force, whereas timber is elastic, it flexes. Think of the hulls of ships, timber sailing ships, the same sort of principle. And Whiteside realised that if he used only timber, it would give his lighthouse an additional elasticity, which would help it to kind of resist and to work with storms rather than try and stand too strong and brittly against them.
And there was another reason why John Phillips, who'd commissioned the lighthouse, might have preferred oak to iron or stone. It was a lot less expensive.
John Phillips was nearing bankruptcy, so he would have been very keen to build a lighthouse quite quickly, quite cheaply, to enable him to bring a little bit of income in to help relieve his debts.
After a successful dry run ashore, the main structure went up on the Smalls in just one summer. The lighthouse entered service in 1776. However, battered by fierce winds and waves, this unusual structure was a risky home for its keepers and needed continual strengthening and repairs.
The Smalls Lighthouse put in a good 50 years of service before it took its first major blow from the sea.
But tragedy was about to return to the Smalls and rock the wooden lighthouse to its core. Around 20 miles offshore, lighthouse keepers experienced an isolated life of hardship out on the Smalls Rocks for over 200 years. In winter 1831, ferocious storms were wreaking havoc along the Welsh coast, and a fatal weakness in the design of the first lighthouse was about to be exposed.
A freak wave hit the reef in such a way that instead of rushing through the pillars, it surged upwards, smashing the floor of the living quarters up into the ceiling above.
The strength of the wave was such that the actual floor was detached from the bottom of the cabin, driven up through the lighthouse, where it squashed the keepers against the roof. One of them died of his injuries, the other barely survived.
The lighthouse had lost its first keeper. But was that the result of just another bad storm? Or did something else contribute to this particular tragedy?
Sailors have often told tales of so-called rogue waves. A single, awesomely powerful wave that seems to come out of nowhere. But are they a real phenomenon? For centuries, there's been very little proof that they were anything more than the product of a very vivid imagination. Thankfully, here at Edinburgh University, researchers have answered that question once and for all.
Yeah, just watch your head as we come up.
Thank you.
I'm meeting Dr. Tom Davey, who runs the university's flow wave test facility.
Hey, it feels like I'm walking out onto a massive bridge over the sea.
Yes, it's a perspective you don't get to usually see in real life.
This is very impressive. There's a lot of movement all around us here from the sides of the tank, moving in and out. How does it work then?
We've got these wave makers, which are the paddles you see, on the entire circumference of the tank. And they're constantly just feeling the force of the water, and they're putting in energy to create waves, and they're taking out energy to absorb the waves.
So even in this circular tank that we're in here now, you're not getting reflections of waves from one side back in. Everything you see here now is being controlled.
We've got full directional control, and we can build up very, very complicated sea states.
Wow.
These rows of sensors precisely record the height and behavior of every wave created in the tank. And in this miniaturized version of nature, these peaks are about 1 meter tall.
And what's the scale of the testing that you do here?
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is about 1 to 25th scale.
What, a 1 meter swell here, that translates to 25 meters at sea, which is, well, it's way above this building, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we've got about an 8 meter ceiling here, so.
So it's about 3 times the height of this building. Oh.
It's a fairly terrifying thought.
I suddenly feel a bit seasick, Tom.
But can rogue waves really come from nowhere? Finding out what it takes to create one is Dr. Mark McAllister.
There are accounts of the wave that was so destructive at the Smalls Lighthouse, the original Smalls Lighthouse. There was a surge of water upwards. Would that be considered a freak wave, possibly? Energies coming together to create that?
Yep, so we call that geometric focusing. So the waves coming in all the different directions meet at the same place, create a much larger wave. You actually kind of get this vertical kind of jet of water that could shoot up and potentially hit the bottom of a kind of offshore structure.
All right, so we've got some activity out in the wave tank here now, Mark.
Yep, so what's going on is the paddles at the side are generating these waves in two different directions now. They're coming at an angle of 120 degrees apart, and they're going to meet in the middle of the tank, and what you'll see is they'll combine and create this really large wave that breaks.
And there is a lot of wave, okay, around the edge of the tank. They're not that high waves, but then when it gets to the middle, suddenly it's probably 3-4 times the height.
At full scale in the ocean, that would be something like a 25-meter high wave.
And that's where it gets really scary. If you were out at sea, whether that's on a lighthouse or in a boat, and seemingly out of nowhere, this enormous 25-meter wave came at you, or bigger perhaps.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't like to be there.
So, rogue waves are real, but so rare they can even catch seasoned lighthouse keepers by surprise.
Having spent 40 years in a marine environment, I never believed in a freak wave until I got caught by one. I was at Longstone Lighthouse, nice calm day, and suddenly a strange noise. I turned around and there was a tsunami, a huge wave approaching towards me. It was a freak wave. I was fortunate to be able to cling to a rock, and I survived that. And it was only later that I found that some years earlier, another keeper had actually lost his life from exactly the same occurrence in almost the same spot.
Rogue waves proved fatal to more than one lighthouse keeper. But they're just one of the dangers and hardships these heroic men faced in the course of their duties. Having delved into what it takes to build one of these extraordinary towers, I want to find out what it was like to actually live in one. And where better than Smeaton's Tower? This was the very first granite rock lighthouse, originally constructed 6 miles out at sea in 1759. It was rebuilt at Plymouth Hoe. It's probably the closest we can get to what life might have been like for keepers in the 18th century.
One more flight.
The first thing I want to know is what a keeper's duties in a candlelit lighthouse would be. Historian Chris Robinson is here to give some insight into a bygone life.
Panoramic 360, of course. Absolutely stunning. How long might lighthouse keepers have been away from land, out on the rock?
They tended to do 2 months on and a month off.
2 months out at a time? Can you tell me a little bit about the kind of work that they might be doing?
It was dusk till dawn, essentially, so that there was always a light on.
And would that have been quite an intense job?
Well, they'd need to monitor the candles, they'd need to trim the wicks, because if the wicks got too long, and that would create a bit of smoke, which would possibly fog the lantern on the inside as well. So you had to monitor the candles throughout. There were stiff fines for falling asleep on duty. And you're working through the night. There was a lot to be done, a lot of cooking, a lot of cleaning. There was no, getting the maid in to do whatever. You had to fend for yourself, and it had to be spotless.
More recently, the 20th century keepers worked 1 month on and 1 month off, but their duties were much the same.
The longest watch would be from 4 a.m. until noon, and that's when most of the work in the lighthouse was done. The whole lighthouse, from top to bottom, would be cleaned down.
The funny thing was brasswork, you polished brasswork and steelwork all over the place. Well, then you didn't put your hands on the brasswork because you leave your fingerprints. So it defeated the object of having brass handrails, really.
Back in the 18th century, I'm preparing for a night shift.
Let's give that a bit of a stir.
Before a long, cold night, I'm cooking up a storm as best I can. There's no wood burning here anymore, so I'm improvising this evening with an electric hot plate.
So my cooking facilities here are rather simple. Got an oven here and one hot plate. But, I mean, that would do. There's also the sink, which at the moment's got a bit of washing up to be done in. But you'll notice there's no taps here for this sink, because fresh water on a rock lighthouse is such a precious commodity. And as such, you try and save as much of it as you possibly can.
Food supplies were limited, even in the 20th century. So when it came to meal times, keepers often had to get creative.
You took out your month's food with you. So if you forgot something, well, you're in trouble. You might live on seagull's eggs for a bit, or if you had a chappie who's a good fisherman, that would help a lot as well.
We had somebody there who did kite fishing, and that entails going up onto the lantern and floating a kite away from the rocks, and then lowering a line down and then catching fish. And he did catch quite a few that way. And I can remember I was in the kitchen and I got it off the hook from the kitchen window and pulled this fish in, which was, that was quite a nice little time, yeah.
I was quite famous in my own way for what I used to cook for myself. My favourite meal was cold chicken with chips and spaghetti.
Back in the 18th century again, it's time for me to get to work with a lighthouse keeper's #1 job.
Let's see if I can reach some of these. There we are. Now, by far and away, the most important job of the lighthouse keeper is providing the light. Obviously, they would have had real candles, but bearing in mind the historical significance of this tower, I do not want to be the one to burn this down. There must have been a tactic to this so you didn't set yourself on fire as you reached over. Yeah, I would have definitely gone up then. Start to feel a bit gothic up here. But there we go, I'm fully lit. Quite happy with that. Right, on with the rest of my duties.
After all the lights were lit, at least one keeper would be watching them all night to make sure they stayed burning. But being off duty could be a challenge too. How would you keep occupied when your work is done and there's nowhere to go?
So if I'm not tending to the light, if I'm not cooking, if I'm not asleep, if I'm not trying to wash or keep the lighthouse spick and span, I might get a bit of downtime. I think a lot of reading was probably done. You'd probably bring a few books out with you. But if you were a, I don't know, skilled carpenter, you might bring some wood and some basic tools out to whittle up some toys or something to take home maybe. I think the reality of being stuck out on a rock in the middle of the sea for months at a time is that you'd entertain yourself however you could.
They carried out hobbies, very varied, from knitting to moth hunting, ship making. Ships in bottles was a tradition one. I made a medium-sized Victorian rocking horse for the grandchildren, which still adorns my dining room at home. It was surprising the amount of hobbies that went on until TV arrived, and then sadly most of those were lost.
After a long night shift, you might be turning in as the sun came up and your colleagues went to work. Just another challenge for lighthouse keepers to overcome.
All right then. It's definitely about time. Oh, not a moment too soon. Time for a bit of shut-eye. Let's climb in. It's actually quite a bit more space in here than you might imagine from the outside. Very cleverly designed. So it fits very snug inside the curved walls of the lighthouse here. But seeing as it's going to be getting light out here soon, and my colleagues would probably be making a bit of a racket as they go about their duties, these beds come with quite a special design feature. And on that note, I'll bid you good night.
Just one night far from home on an isolated lighthouse could be lonely. 18th century keepers had to do it for months. But stone towers like this one did provide their keepers with a peace of mind that no wooden structure could ever match. Back at the Smalls, Henry Whiteside's wooden lighthouse would eventually be replaced. But it had stood for 85 years and was never fully defeated by the sea.
Whiteside did a pretty good job, actually, with his original design. It looks a bit kind of shambolic, but it did the job.
In 1836, the last privately owned lighthouses were purchased by Trinity House, the English and Welsh Lighthouse Authority. They soon moved to modernise and update the light in line with their other rock lighthouses.
By the 1860s, you more or less had a template lighthouse design. So everybody had more or less agreed that it was stone, tall, as smoothly shaped as possible. One of the innovations that was brought in was to step the first few courses, which broke some of the force of the waves.
The success of that is the fact that the Smalls Lighthouse is still there 160 years after its construction with, barely a mark on the blockworks, if you like.
And the lighthouse was as important as ever, but not just for passing ships.
By the 19th century, the Smalls Lighthouse was seeing shipping traffic from all over the globe pass into and out of the Irish Sea, where burgeoning ports like Dublin, Belfast, Bristol, and above all, Liverpool were eagerly waiting to do business.
Britain was in the midst of an economic boom that was about to make Liverpool one of the most important cities in the world and make the owners of the Smalls Lighthouse phenomenally rich. 20 miles off the coast of Pembrokeshire, the Smalls Lighthouse has protected shipping from a group of deadly rocks for nearly 250 years. But the vision of John Phillips, who built the first lighthouse here in the 1770s, hadn't just benefited passing mariners.
When John Phillips died, he was still heavily in debt. But less than 50 years later, his lighthouse was earning his descendants more than £10,000 a year. Now, that could be up to as much as £10 million in today's money.
And by 1852, after Trinity House had purchased the light, when other lighthouses around the English coastline were earning in the region of £5,000 to £10,000, the Smalls Lighthouse was bringing in over twice that amount. A phenomenal sum.
Far exceeding any other lighthouse in Britain, and presumably the world.
And by far the biggest contributor of lighthouse dues to the Smalls was the Port of Liverpool. So why was this particular industrial town the source of so much revenue? Liverpool's Maritime Museum might hold the answers. Here, Ian Murphy looks after archives, stretching back in incredible detail over 300 years to the early 1700s.
What's this book you've got here, Ian? The Bill of Entry.
The bills of entry basically were published every day, and a record of ships coming in and out of the port. So it's a real snapshot of the port on one day. You're talking potentially 30 ships a day coming in, around 10,000 ships a year.
So the page we've got open here, this is for Monday, June 28th, 1830. Where have we got ships coming in from?
So you've got ships here coming in from Calcutta, from Baltimore, from New York. By this point, it's certainly a kind of a global port.
the amount of money that Smalls Lighthouse would have been making as the ships coming past would have had to have paid their duties to it as they come through. I mean, there must have been years where they were making an absolute packet.
One factor driving that global traffic and enormous income was the great fortunes being made in the New World.
Well, this is quite an exciting looking documentary, isn't it? Is this an advertisement really for travel to Melbourne, down to Australia?
It's exactly what it is. It's a sailing bill, as we call them. It's an early advert for a passenger service to Melbourne.
During the 1850s, there was huge demand for travel to Australia, and hopeful passengers flocked to Liverpool to join the Great Australian Gold Rush.
They were looking to make a fortune and bring it back to the UK.
And so this is the Royal Charter is the name of the ship, not just a steam clipper. She is a magnificent steam clipper.
But despite the best man-made technology, Mother Nature was still in charge.
Even with the safety arrangements around kind of the lighthouses that were in place by this time, Royal Charter ran into a storm off the coast of North Wales and unfortunately kind of ran aground against rocks there and with a huge loss of life.
But despite the terrible risks of sea travel at the time, passenger numbers passing under the protection of the Smalls to Australia, America and the rest of the world exploded.
Records of those leaving Britain and the old world behind in the 19th and 20th centuries suggest a total well in excess of 5 million migrants. Over 4 million of those passed through Liverpool and out into the Irish Sea. It's just extraordinary to think how busy that relatively narrow stretch of sea would have once been. And all of those ships would have had to make it past the hazardous Smalls rocks with the help of the Smalls Light.
While it may not be earning the fortune it was back then, the lighthouse is still faithfully serving shipping on the Irish Sea. Automated in 1987, despite its perilous, storm-swept location 20 miles from civilization, its former keepers still remember it fondly.
I would say sunny days on the Smalls when you could lie on the landing, bronzy, all afternoon. You're not on watch, you finish your watch, and yeah, it's just really pleasant and relaxing. And happy days when they built the helipad. I liked it up there. It was just really let your mind go free. You were lord and master of all you surveyed, on top of the world.
It was something I knew nothing about, so I had no real preconceptions except for the fact that you were going to be on a lighthouse. And I just took to it like a duck to water. It was great. If you went up onto the helipad in the middle of that midnight to 4 watch, with the lights beams revolving underneath you on a clear sky, you can just imagine what the stars would look like. It was wonderful.
It was magical, and that's what I miss most of all about being on the Smalls. That peace and quiet and tranquility.
I would certainly do the same thing again. I loved it. I really was pleased to be doing it. A real sense of we're doing some benefit to the seafaring community in particular, yeah.
The story of the Smalls Lighthouse is one of testing both people and engineering to their very limits. Almost 250 years ago, to design and build a structure that could survive 20 miles from land, it would have been a leap into the unknown.
And despite everything that both nature and fate could throw at both generations of the Smalls Lighthouse, it's kept one of Britain's busiest shipping channels safe. This is the story of true survivors. heroic feats of engineering in maritime history.
They were their eyes, they were the front line of defence.
Built to save the lives of thousands at sea.
The sea is always a very real and present danger.
Drowned in epic storms.
You had no chance of getting off.
So how did they build them?
Oh, that is majestic.
And how do they stay standing?
What a beauty.
I'm Rob Bell.
I bet that gets really hot.
And I'm going behind closed doors.
Wow!
To explore a hidden world of spine-chilling tales.
The body of his colleague was starting to decompose.
Sunken treasure.
That's one of the muskets that we found down there on the wreck.
No way! Look at that.
And dazzling innovations.
Literally playing with fire.
To uncover the secrets.
There is a pure magic about a light in the dark.
Of some of the most extraordinary structures this country ever built. This time, I head out to the scene of one of Britain's most heroic rescue stories. A lighthouse keeper's daughter, whose legendary act of bravery captured the hearts of the nation. An icon for those who put their own lives at risk to help others at sea. This is the story of the Longstone Lighthouse. This is Northumberland, the northeast coast of England, where lonely beaches look out on a constellation of rocky islands. It's a landscape of wild, untouched beauty.
There's seals keep bobbing their heads up all around us all the time. Just being nosy, seeing what's going on. The Northumbrian coast now feels like a really peaceful place of sanctuary for people and wildlife alike. But the moods of this beautiful part of Britain are driven by a fickle mistress, the North Sea.
These relatively shallow waters are easily whipped up by high winds and tidal shifts. And when it does turn, this is one part of the coast you want to avoid. The Farn Islands extend 7 miles out near the Scottish border. They're in the middle of a direct route between the eastern ports of England and Scotland. But this long stretch of coastline can leave mariners dangerously exposed.
The weather boils up very quickly, and that there are very few safe harbours on the east coast. You do have this issue with having to run for cover, but there being nowhere to run to, basically.
And when mariners do need any port in a storm, the Farn Islands can easily stand between wild sea and safety.
The conditions around the Farn Islands are really treacherous. There are these small rocky islets with narrow channels, and there are these strong rip currents that can drag boats in and potentially be wrecked on these sharp, jagged rocks. And this is why it's such a precarious area and why we need a lighthouse there to warn those ships away.
Now, it might seem relatively calm in amongst the Farn Islands here today, but this collection of islands and rocks is a complex and dangerous maze to navigate. We're about 3 miles out from the mainland here, and just look at these rocks, how close we are to them. On both sides, ahead of us here, and it kind of feels like these rocks are constantly shifting, like they're almost closing in behind us as we gingerly try and pick our way through.
These rocks have been a constant threat to safe passage in and out of the bustling industrial heart of the northeast.
That North Sea stretch is extremely busy. You've just got this huge sort of crossways diagonal traffic going all over the place the whole time, and lots of shipping movement from Norway all the way down to France and Spain.
So many ships have fallen into the trap of these islands that there are 3 lighthouses within a 10-mile radius here.
It's no wonder the Farn Islands needed more than one lighthouse. And the furthest outpost is the most famous, the Longstone Rock Lighthouse. One small step for Robbie. All right, we're on Longstones.
The Longstone Lighthouse was completed in 1826, after repeated shipwrecks made it clear that vessels needed to be warned away from trying to pass closer to shore. But its construction would be considerably easier than more exposed offshore lighthouses, where builders relied on a support ship as a base. Here there was space for barracks and extra stores.
Now, this was a rock lighthouse with a difference. In fact, it wasn't even classified as a rock lighthouse at all, because a keeper could live here full time. And not just the keeper, his wife and children too. I mean, imagine that as your family home.
The Longstone Lighthouse must have qualified as the most isolated home in Britain. But with or without family, keepers have fond memories of this strange outpost in the North Sea.
Well, the Longstone, you had much more room to go walk about there, so that really is an extra bonus. The entertainment of the eider ducks and wildlife and everything. I was there with a bloke called Morris Bunting in April, and he was going out in his underpants, diving into the water to get sea urchins, and he cleaned them out and everything, made ornaments out of them. How he didn't get hypothermia, I don't know.
Longstone, they just had a particular atmosphere. It just felt good. There seemed to be always something to do there. We had a tiny little beach there. We used to have little games of cricket there, with an upturned fish box and everything on a nice summer day. So it was quite pleasant.
Because the rocks were exposed at very low water, there was the opportunity for mussels, crabs, lobsters. At Longstone, there was an excess of lobsters at times, so always a welcome change to the diet to be able to get those.
The first family to move into this far-flung outpost were to make it go down in history. The keeper's daughter, Grace Darling, had the North Sea in her blood. She literally grew up on offshore lighthouses, and by 1838, few people knew the Farn Islands better.
To give you some idea of just how different it must have been for a 22-year-old lighthouse keeper's daughter to live here, you just have to consider one aspect of Grace's daily routine. One of her jobs was to collect vegetables from the garden, which doesn't sound like an overly arduous task. But if you have a look around the lighthouse compound here, there's absolutely no sign of any vegetable patch. I don't even see where one would go, it's just rock. No, for me to find Grace's groceries, I'm gonna need a compass and a telescope.
This is the view from Grace's bedroom window back towards the island she lived on as a girl.
Yeah, that's it. Just over there, that large island over there is Brownsman Island. Now from the age 3 months, Grace and her family lived over there. And they had a garden where they grew vegetables and where they kept chicken and geese as well. So by my reckoning, if I were to go and collect some eggs now, I'm going to need to plot a course, where was I? Here, It's west-southwest, about 200 degrees across to Brownsman Island. And I'm going to need to get into my boat. I'm going to have to row for just over a mile to get there across the North Sea and all that could throw at me. Pick up my eggs and then I've got to row back. Home delivery would be a lot easier.
Rowing a boat was not strange to Grace. She must have been a very strong young lady. To actually work at the Longstone Lighthouse with the history of the Grace Darling connection, it was a great thing. Grace was one of us. Grace was a lighthouse keeper.
Grace's rowing skills were about to go down in history, but on a mission she'd rather forget.
In 1838, Grace Darling and her family had been living a secluded life in the Longstone Lighthouse for 12 years. Now 22, Grace had a date with destiny. The tempestuous North Sea was about to transform her into a living legend.
The weather report from the 7th of September 1838 takes a grim turn. It's a skipper's worst nightmare. The safety of port is just the other side of the Farn Islands, but you're losing power in a strong gale, driving relentlessly towards the rocks.
The SS Forfarshire was steaming north for Dundee with around 60 people aboard when its engines failed. As the ship battled through the night to steer for safety, on the Lighthouse, Grace was preparing to take over from the lantern by keeping lookout.
Grace was on watch, and in the grey light of dawn, she looked out of her second-story window and saw a chilling sight. Half a mile away, a large paddle steamer had struck Big Harcar Rock and broken in two.
Steve Newman can guide me to the very spot where the Forfarshire came to grief, under the gaze of the Longstone Lighthouse.
Steve, we've managed to get pretty close up to, this is Big Harcar Rock
right,
here, is
yeah,
it?
this is where the survivors were found, and then the bow was just about this end. So the survivors are able to scramble along this ridge that you see there and get onto that high point, the highest point on the island.
I mean, this is, what, in the middle of the night and during a massive storm?
Yeah, so they would have obviously been freezing cold, hypothermia would start to set in.
As the ship broke up, at least 40 drowned. A small group managed to get away in a boat. The rest could only cling onto the rock as long as they had the strength. Every minute in the storm was crucial to survival, so Grace's father, William, decided to make a rescue attempt. But in these conditions, his heavy boat normally needed at least 2 men to row it. William Darling makes the most agonising decision of his life, to give in to Grace's pleas and let his own daughter take the other oar.
They both launched this quite large boat called a coble, still relatively frail in those kinds of seas because those boats are quite difficult to manage. And certainly the relative difference in strength between Grace and her father meant that it would have been really difficult getting back. So they kind of went not knowing how it would end, I think.
The size of the boat that they used was huge. And often used to look, because you could see exactly the route that she would have taken. How the hell did they manage to go through there, and then the tide would be horrendous.
No matter how experienced Grace and her father were in rowing the cobble around, because it was their means of transport out here, right? Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that journey from Longstone round to here on that morning would have been a very difficult, challenging, dangerous row, would it?
To row 1.5 miles when you're a young girl in those conditions is an incredible performance, whatever way you look at it. You've got to go around that reef all the way out to the end here, then come this way. So it's not a straight line, it's a huge big dogleg here, which increases the distance you have to go.
I mean, I wouldn't fancy that today.
No, nor would I.
Absolutely not.
Although the lighthouse was half a mile from the wreck, Grace and her father had to row much further to make a rescue attempt. They had to find the most sheltered seas along the way, dodging the constant threat of being swamped, overturned, or blown against the rocks. But then it was time to get onto the rocks.
This is probably the most dangerous part of the whole operation, because you're fighting the wind, you're fighting the rain, you're fighting the current. But now she's got to stop and lean over and grab some of those rocks to get a secure hold, and then she's got to coax the survivors down, taking their time, carefully, so they don't slip.
Perilous.
3 people had already died on the rock. The remaining 9 were too many for the problem. But every passing minute could mean another life lost.
They managed to take off a handful of survivors from the rock that first time, take them back to the lighthouse, get them inside. Grace looked after them while her father went back with a couple of the survivors to try and rescue the others.
In 2 trips, they brought back 9 survivors. It's a hell of a thing to do. Young ladies of that time did not go out in boats, in storms, rescuing people. It wasn't expected of her or her father to carry out a rescue, but they did. And that's why they are part of folklore.
This is an amazing story, isn't it? It's such an inspiring story. And these kinds of acts of really selfless, really extreme bravery are sometimes called extreme altruism. So we hear people say things like, I just did what anyone would do. But even in extreme circumstances, when there is time to think and time to talk yourself out of it, the interesting thing is that people don't. They still follow through and they still act. And that's quite positive, really. It does suggest that people maybe really are instinctively selfless.
Grace received the first British Gallantry Medal ever awarded to a woman. Her heroism, which could so easily have turned into tragic self-sacrifice, made her an overnight sensation.
Grace was soon bombarded by the Victorian equivalent of the paparazzi. Portrait artists were said to have besieged her tiny lighthouse home, vying for the opportunity to paint her.
Grace Darling is the heroine that everybody knows about. What she did was incredibly brave, and a heroine like Grace Darling is going to absolutely appeal to the Victorian imagination.
Grace was hit by a storm of celebrity. Her story inspired theatrical tributes, popular songs, soap adverts, and tea trays.
It must have been very difficult. You live a very isolated life, you don't have much social interaction, and then after she becomes incredibly famous, there are people flocking to meet her. They want to meet this heroine. That must have been extremely difficult for somebody of her sort of temperament.
Unfortunately for Grace, this was not what she wanted. Records show that she was not interested in all the fame and all the attention. She was a very humble person, and actually she just wanted to go back to her old life in the lighthouse.
But Grace never had the chance to return to the quiet life on Longstone that she craved so much. Her memorial stands at St Aidan's Church in Bamborough, in sight of the sea.
Grace tragically died after contracting tuberculosis at the age of 26, just 4 years after her heroic rescue. Her life may have been short, but her legacy lives on.
The RNLI have their own Grace Darling Museum here in Bamborough.
Lovely.
Curator Marlene Vincenton can offer a unique glimpse into Grace's extraordinary feat. The very boat that Grace had to handle.
This did catch my eye, Marlene, and how could it not? Because it's enormous.
Yeah, I mean, normally in those conditions, you would need at least 3 to 4 people to maintain it, and obviously they did it together. And when they got to the rock, William actually had to go out to get people in, so Grace had to study it by herself.
If I was in there on my own with one oar trying to control this and keep it in position, The thought of that is quite intimidating, I have to say.
It is. I mean, Shopsy would have been used to rowing. I mean, she rowed all the time, so she was very strong.
Is there any way I can get a kind of feel for it? Can I hold one of these oars?
Yeah, we'll probably lift one out together, because they're quite long and heavy.
Okay, Marlene, I'm ready.
If you want to go down and just lift it up.
Yeah, up a bit. There's some weight on that,
Yes,
Marlene.
they're heavy on there. Yeah.
That's where you're pivoting
Yeah.
on the roller there, and then you're holding the handle.
Yeah.
The oars,
Goes in. Yeah.
a long way from you, and that's getting battered by the storm and all the currents and rocks you're probably trying to avoid as well. Grace would have had to have really kept her wits about her.
Yeah.
I don't know as I would have fared as successfully
I know.
as Grace might have.
I definitely wouldn't know.
At the time of Grace's rescue, life-saving was only just beginning to become institutionalised around Britain's coasts.
If a ship got in trouble, there was no formalised lifeboat system. The rescue service might be just local people putting out in a boat. By 1824 is when the RNLI is established, but it's still very piecemeal.
Grace's selfless act of bravery brought life-saving into the public eye.
This shy and unassuming lighthouse keeper's daughter became the embodiment of the powerful image of those who save lives at sea.
But what legacy did she leave behind for us in the 21st century? Grace Darling's heroic rescue attempt from the Longstone Lighthouse made her a household name in Victorian Britain. She captured the public imagination at a time when the RNLI were formalising life-saving throughout Britain's seafaring communities.
The lighthouses and the RNLI came out of the same time and the same impulse, by this kind of realisation that it's worth saving life, because then you don't have to keep training up kind of more and more sailors, and also it's more Christian. As a statement of kind of what Britain was and was becoming, it was sort of showing the way.
The fishing town of Seahouses was the nearest harbour to Grace's home. And here at the lifeboat station, her legacy couldn't be better honoured.
All right, Ian.
Welcome to Seahouses.
Thank you.
Ian Clayton is giving me special access. We've come a long way from Grace Darling's wooden cobble.
Oh, Ian, I'm enjoying this already.
Yeah, great piece of kit.
Wow.
Well, here we have it. This is our Shannon-class lifeboat. Let's go on board and have a look.
Wow. It looks brand spanking new.
The boat's been here 12 months. This particular vessel, I think, is one of the most advanced designs of lifeboat that the RNLI have put into service recently.
This new addition is just the latest in a long line of lifeboats here, stretching back to 1827.
Got all these boards all the way around here.
Yes.
Are they dating previous lifeboats that you've had here at this
These
house?
are the history, the call-outs from our previous lifeboats.
Every call-out?
Yeah, and we also have an earlier lifeboat called Grace Darling.
Oh, it's very impressive.
Right, if you want to just come through into the wheelhouse.
In the worst of weather, the crew can coordinate all their rescue operations from inside this impressive command module.
Behind you is a watertight door that keeps this as like an airtight
dry
in
area,
here.
I guess.
And it also means that if the boat was to capsize, the boat will self-right straight away.
It'll
yeah,
pop itself back round.
So even if the engines are going at full speed when it capsized, the engines will cut out into neutral, and the boat will right itself.
How does the boat do that? How does it self-right?
It's basically because all of the weight's in the bottom. This would be an enclosed area full of air, so it will just tip the right way up again.
Oh, okay, so it's just gravity.
It's gravity, simple as that.
Protected in here, the crew have a dazzling array of instruments to ensure they don't miss a thing.
Just being in here, Ian, it feels very high tech. It looks like there's a lot of information available to a crew member sat here. In fact, in any of these seats around here on this screen, there's all sorts of stuff here: VHR, radio, chart, radar, engine, CCTV.
Well, you can select on each screen what you want to watch. It depends what job you're doing.
just like a lighthouse, there's so much more to this boat than meets the eye.
If we had a number of people that have been rescued, particularly out in rough weather, it'd be far safer to put them down into what we call a survivor's cabin.
How many people would you be able to rescue at one time?
We can carry up to 79.
79?
79 casualties on board this vessel. Obviously, that affects...
Where do they go?
Most of them would be on deck. You would obviously put some down here to make space on the boat, but it would affect the self-righting capability of the lifeboat to do that.
I mean, it goes on all the way under here as well.
You've got twin Scania engines in there, chucking out about 600 horsepower each, and they power Hamilton water jets. It's one of the most impressive boats that I've ever been on.
And you are continuing to impress me with every step we take around this vessel. It's on the verge of almost taming Mother Nature and taming the seas. It in a sense that it can cope with almost anything you could throw at it.
I think you want to be careful that you don't lull yourself into a false sense of security.
Yes.
Because out there, the sea is a very, very powerful adversary. That one time you are complacent is the one time you will end up having an accident. Somebody could get hurt or worse.
An unpredictable coastline means that accidents are more likely here than out in open sea. When things do go wrong, it's down to the efforts of the lifeboats and Coast Guard to stop them getting worse. But lighthouses form a powerful network to prevent emergencies at sea in the first place. And the keepers found they could play an additional role as Coast Guards, spotting trouble as it developed.
We were further out at sea than the Coast Guard station. Lighthouse keepers were their eyes. They were the front line of defence. We could see further than they could. We could report incidents or direct lifeboats or rescue craft as and when necessary.
But to ensure that a light was always lit, a keeper could never leave his post. Waiting for rescue to come to ships in trouble could be agonising.
If they did get into any danger, the only thing you could do was report it, and then you were just a bystander. All we could do was just watch and listen on the radio, and that was the, I suppose, hardest thing about it. You just couldn't do anything. You were powerless.
The Sea House's lifeboat crew need to ensure their rescues are as fast and efficient as possible.
Yeah, we're good to go. Here we go.
I'm joining them on a training exercise. I'm told we'll be at the Farn Islands in minutes, so we could be in for a bumpy ride.
So whilst we're travelling out to sea, we've been stowed away down here in what's called the survivor's cabin. We're right down in the hull of the ship, out of the way.
The RNLI has over 400 lifeboats like this, capable of taking on the open sea all around Britain's coastline. Just like Grace's mission, the fastest response could make all the difference between life and death. And it's not long before the Sea House's crew have us virtually in the shadow of Grace's old home, the Longstone Lighthouse.
Right in position.
And I have the dubious honour of throwing their dummy man overboard into the North Sea.
When you're set. Hard overboard.
Got one crew member indicating with his hands, keeping his eyes on him at all times. The coxswain's actually making a safe circle right back around to the casualty, to the man overboard, called Dead Fred.
Dead Fred?
Yeah. There's a crew member on the bow of the boat also indicating his position, so there's eyes on him all the time, nobody takes their eyes off him.
The drill you're doing now, is this typical of the kind of drills you'd be doing for training and kind of practicing these manoeuvres?
Yeah.
In challenging seas, the coxswain has to avoid ploughing into the casualty, while the crew literally hang out over the waves to reach for them. It's like a tightrope walk in a storm.
The crew member actually hooked them on there now.
I've got them.
Take the thread, take the thread, take the wind.
How typical is a rescue like this?
Obviously, if it was flat, calm, you wouldn't likely to get a man overboard. In these kind of conditions, you're far more likely to. As you can see, it takes a whole team to be able to do it.
I tell you what I see from this, there's a lot of communication going on the whole time, and everybody knows exactly what their role is at any one time. And I guess it's only through drills like this that you get that smooth with the whole process.
Exactly.
At the Longstone Lighthouse, keepers would witness accidents on the waters of the Farn Islands, even in the calmest conditions.
I have seen incidents with the local trip boats. One in particular comes to mind that came to an unscheduled stop at the lighthouse, discharged about 20 passengers, and then promptly sank. No one was injured, and the lifeboat came out and took those survivors ashore. Any vessel sinking with anybody on board is a life-threatening situation. You don't want to be in the water very long, especially fully clothed. You're very heavy. It is difficult to stay afloat. So a trip boat, 20 people on board, it's going to be in trouble.
All the Sea House's crew have to be prepared to be called out at any time.
It's a widely known fact about RNLI that a lot of the crew members are volunteers.
Yes. Like if it was one of my family or friends that was in difficulty in the sea, I would want someone to be coming out and rescuing them.
Yeah.
So that's what I do.
In fact, being out here near Longstone Lighthouse, you know, that one of the first stories of volunteer lifesavers at sea.
Of grey starling, yeah. And there is no comparison. Like you say, we've got all the state-of-the-art equipment, the state-of-the-art boats, the kit that we wear, none of which grey starling had. So it does bring it home to you exactly how brave that she actually was.
Absolutely.
Doing that rescue that night.
And as long as people are going out to sea, there will always be people like RNLI who are here just in case things go badly wrong.
In this weather.
Well, right, yeah. How does this compare?
It's fine.
It's not too bad at all.
It's not too bad, really, no.
Okay. I'd call this proper choppy.
The lifeboat's coxswain, Keith Slater, knows he can not only depend on his crew to go out in any weather, but the lifeboat too.
This is the newest boat in the fleet.
And she's a beauty as well.
Yeah, so.
Are you quite proud of her?
Oh yeah, almost £4 million worth of kit. So
do you know what, you can tell
we do is look after it.
Because even with what modern technology, it's still a real danger around here, I guess.
Oh yes. A few years ago, just in the rocks over there, we had the big container ship, the Danio, ran aground.
Yes.
So you never quite know what's going to happen when the pager goes off.
Yeah.
The most important thing is to get out there and help people. So that's the whole point of all this training and the money spent and the time spent, and you know, even if it's just one person in a 25-year career, you know, that's still one person you've saved.
That's enough excitement for me for one day. Time to return to dry land.
What an incredibly impressive piece of kit that is. Not forgetting its crew and in fact the entire operation. And that's built on nearly 200 years of saving lives out at sea. As soon as you step on board that boat, you know straight away that you are surrounded by the height of technology. But you know what else? It's also the way the crew comport themselves. Even though that was an exercise like that, it feels like it's all in a day's work for them. You know, there's no dramas. Everyone's very well drilled. Everyone's very calm and competent at what they're doing. It's a very impressive operation to witness.
It's a long, long tradition, life-saving at sea. Coastal communities understand the sea, they understand the dangers of the sea. And today, you have an incredible range of people who will go out and rescue people because they understand and they will be prepared to go out there and risk their lives to rescue them.
The whole objective of lighthouses and their keepers is to prevent the worst happening. But their success depends on other, less obvious efforts too.
Behind the celebrated tales of stoicism and self-sacrifice like Grace's, there are the unsung heroes, the inventors and scientists who took on their own seemingly impossible challenges.
The Longstone Lighthouse is famous as the remote homestead of Victorian heroine Grace Darling. Although it's a remarkable outpost of family life, it's a relatively unassuming building compared to those standing up to the wild Atlantic or barely in sight of land.
In engineering terms, the Longstone Lighthouse may not be one of the most prominent examples of these groundbreaking structures, but each and every one of these relatively featureless towers conceals a rich history of scientific advances that keep their light shining.
The open fires and braziers that first warned ships away from land were expensive to fuel and unreliable in a storm. So in 1698, the first Rock Lighthouse at Eddystone Reef off Plymouth had to make do with candles. But then oil lamps changed everything. And in 1787, the oil lamps at Kinnaird Headlight north of Aberdeen were first combined with parabolic reflectors to concentrate the beam. 1823 saw the advent of powerful lens technology that would supercharge every lighthouse to this day, the Fresnel prism lens. From the second half of the 19th century, new fuels like kerosene, gas, and finally the generation of electricity answered the need to reliably shine a light through all weathers at sea. Nowhere more so than the Longstone. Over a quarter of its budget went on the latest lantern technology. And its light had its roots in a simple discovery in the 18th century that revolutionized the reach of oil lamps. It's a discovery that almost didn't happen, but for an extraordinary accident that changed the course of lighthouse history.
Now, the story goes that Aimé Argan, a Swiss physicist and chemist, had been working for some time to develop an oil lamp that was brighter, and he had made some progress. His oil lamps burned more efficiently than those that came before, but he still wanted one that burned bigger, that burned brighter. But it wasn't until one evening when having dinner when a wine bottle was accidentally smashed. Now, presumably it was fairly well into the evening at this point. Without any real intent or purpose behind it, Argan's brother held the broken bottleneck over the flame of the oil lamp that they had on the table that was presumably lighting their dinner. And something remarkable happened that had Argan in raptures.
As night draws in, it's the perfect time to see Argan's eureka moment for ourselves.
Safety first. Now, before I put my hand anywhere near that flame, pop this on. There we go. Now, I've got this hollow glass cylinder to simulate my broken wine bottleneck. Let's get down here so I can see what's happening. So there's the flame without, and with our cylinder. Look at that, look at that. Look how long that flame is. It's what, 2-3 times the length. It's coming right out the top of the tube. And it's a straight, long flame that's much brighter than it was before. Now, the fire science behind this is fairly simple. The effect of the cylinder means that the air is drawn up through the cylinder, providing the flame with more oxygen all the way around it. The other advantage of using this method is that that flame no longer flickers about anymore. It's nicely controlled. It burns straight up. Without knowing it, this was the solution that Argan had been looking for, to improve the efficiency and the brightness of the flames that he was getting from oil lamps.
Argon's resulting lamp designs weren't bettered until mineral oils like paraffin were refined 75 years later. Not only that, glass chimneys topped oil lamps in just about every home in the country.
3 centuries of Rock Lighthouse building has given us so much more than brighter lights and safer seas for mariners. The challenges of constructing and operating these giant habitable machines has been the driving force behind some incredible innovations that are now part of all of our everyday lives.
Rock lighthouses pioneered the idea of using dovetailing to interlock granite building blocks so nothing could push them apart. In Scotland, the legendary Stephensons invented a new type of crane to lift blocks in a confined space. The balance crane is seen across city skylines to this day. Legendary scientist Michael Faraday solved the problem of generating electricity in lighthouses, bringing electric motors into everyday use. And at South Foreland Lighthouse, Guglielmo Marconi's first radio message from ship to shore heralded the instant international communication that we all take for granted.
The seas are coming over the gallery. Over.
Lighthouses may well have been extraordinary, innovative engineering achievements in their own right, but they'd have been nothing without the extraordinary people who had the right stuff to keep them lit.
People say, well, what on earth do you get to do out there, you know? But it was solitary, but I never felt lonely. The general impression I get that when I say to people that I used to be a lighthouse keeper is that you live there on your own and you must be really lonely and sad. Proud of it now.
All my time at the Longstone was happy. The Farn Islands is one of the most beautiful places I ever worked in. I'd never regretted being anywhere. There was a lot of job satisfaction in knowing that I was making a difference.
Lighthouse keeping was a special job, there's no doubt about it. It was unique, and it was in a unique environment. Lighthouse keepers are a special breed. There ain't many of us left. There aren't many of us left.
Offshore lighthouses have been witness to some incredible changes through the ages. But whether people are still needed to live on them or not, they say so much about us and what we can achieve.
They represent what we can do at our greatest. They represent civilization and humanity and generosity of spirit and public service. And you can't really argue with any of those. There is a pure magic about them, a light in the dark. If you imagine coming across the Atlantic and you've been at sea for kind of days or weeks, and the first thing you see is this little beam flashing off and on and off and on. There's something really magical about that, and for as long as it exists, it will continue to be magic.
These seemingly simple monuments to human invention have shaped much of modern life. The need for rock lighthouses to safeguard Britain's waters has lit up the world.